Hi, I'm Ari, and I'm going to start a vlog on building race cars and also working on street cars. I have a fleet of cars myself, Italian cars, German cars, British cars, old muscle, and I work on them all myself. I race in the 24 Hours of Lemons series, currently in a team called Silicon Junkyard Racing. We placed, I think, 5th in the West Coast in 2018, and we run 2 cars, and this series is going to start documenting the process and the path that we take to building those cars. Today, I'm talking to you about my friend's Tesla 3. So my friend got in a small accident and he hit a curb with this Tesla, cracked the wheel, and the dealer told him he pulled the steering rack apart. And there's fluid dripping, there's grease everywhere, and there's some kind of boot removed from something when you look down the front of the car. So today we're going to take a look at what is really going on with this Tesla and what it's going to take to get it back on the road. Let's take a look under the car right now. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the car itself. It's a brand new Tesla Model 3. I think it has roughly 1,000 miles on it. And we can see from the wheel that something really bad has gone on. That is a chunk of the actual wheel just missing. And if we turn this wheel, it makes funny noises. It wants to turn back the other way. Isn't that weird? And if we look at the front of the car, we see right away, can you see that there? Right there. The steering is, well, the steering is here, but the lower control arm is not attached anymore. Just for reference, let's take a look at the other side. You can see that bushing and that the spindle is properly attached. And it's kind of interesting because it points downward, and I've never seen one like that. But right away, the dealer ordered tie rods intact. The dealer did not order a lower control arm, did not order any bushings, and those are broken. Now we're looking at what I believe is the drive motor right here, and then sort of some kind of transfer case to give us 4-wheel drive off of this car. And here is the supposed steering rack that's busted. So we can see the steering rack right along here behind the sway bar. There's the electric motor, because of course it's a Tesla, so why would it have a hydraulic rack and have any fluids that would need to be changed? But we can see this rack is perfectly intact. And what we can also see when we're looking at the hub itself from back here is right away we see this. The hub and the axle are under a lot of stress in this car. And that's probably because they're disconnected and ripped out. There's the end of the hub covered in grease. There's the end of the transfer case right there. And just for reference, let's look at the transfer case on the other side of the car. There's the axle boot. There's the axle under no stress connected into that spindle. And that hub assembly is all good. There's this tie rod end. And then we go across the sway bar to the other tie rod end, which I don't know if you can see that, but it looks pretty much perfect. Might have a little bend in it, it's hard to tell, but tie rod end will take me 30 minutes to replace. Okay, so we're still trying to figure out exactly how many parts we have to change. And I can tell you right now, this shouldn't be possible, right? I think it's possible because we're not compressing the spring at all. The strut spring assembly is not being compressed at all. I can also tell you I already know why the wheel spins backwards or the opposite direction of whatever wind I put into it. It unwinds itself. And that's because the axle doesn't turn at all. Not at all. And that's something, oh, now the axle's turning a little bit. And you've got a lot of work to do to figure this car out, that's for sure. But that's not right. And I'll give you a closer look at the design of a Tesla 3 suspension in a moment. Looking at this motor a little more carefully, we find some very strange engineering. There is the axle, and there is the hub, and the axle boot. And you can see, you can't see it from here, so you go to a Tesla dealer and say, I love this Tesla 3, it looks so sleek. I'm going to spend $55,000 on it. Great. You can't see stuff like this though, where there's just some steel spread open in a U like that. Can you guys see that? To let the axle run through the middle of the strut. Never quite seen this. Four-wheel drive in Audi, for example, is far more sophisticated and it seems far more well built. Why am I talking about this stuff, like the quality and the design of this suspension? It's very simple. I have never in my life seen a car hit a curb and pop the drive axle out of the transfer case. Never seen this happen. And it's very clear to me there's an impact here, right there, on the spindle. And we've sheared off the kingpin. There's no castle nut underneath. That's fine. Stuff happens. But, so we've got impact here, an impact on the outer rim, and somehow pulled the wheel out about this far. That's like 4.5 inches to pop it out of the transfer case. I'm in shock, quite honestly. And I'm pretty sure part of it has to do with the design of this coilover and how it passes the drive axle right through the middle of the coilover. And if you watch, you could actually see, oh wow, I am correct. There is an impact wound right there on the coilover on the strut, right where my finger is moving back and forth. The axle, the drive axle, has hit the suspension, which, just like that, right there. Up, 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 and slam. Oh man. I have to say, I wouldn't build this car this way if I were them. Now let's take a look at what's on the inside of the undercarriage tray of the car. This stuff is just sitting there with the exact same grease. Here is, of course, the boot clamp torn open, just probably by the force of the impact. I'm gonna have to, ooh, ho, ho, ho. I don't know if you can see that. Let me get as close as I can. Probably wipe that off a bit. So this is some kind of bearing for the drive axle on the driver's side of this car. And if you clear out this grease, you can see that the chase is cracked open. Let me get something to clean this up and make it clearer to you guys. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a couple of bearings. I have no idea how they fit into the entire axle assembly. We are looking at the under tray, and we are right next to that shattered wheel. And these bearings were there in the tray when I took it off. The tray is ripped off, a little bit of damage to it. You know, you could replace this for a few $100, or probably just choose to leave it as is, or plasta dip the gap in it or something. Anyway, this is a bearing that is working perfectly, and there's a retaining clip, kind of like I would say a C-clip or an E-clip, but it's just seated there with a tiny gap. You can see that little angle in the light. That tiny gap allows you to pull it out and put it in, so you could deal with the chase in there, the race, bearing race in there, sorry. And then this guy, I've already pushed in that retainer clip with my thumb just a little, but he wants to come out. It looks like the bearing rolls smoothly. I don't know if I'll reuse that bearing. It's probably massively stressed given the context of what happened here. But yeah, next step, let's pull this axle out. Let's hammer that right there on the hammer. Let's pull this wheel off, pull this axle off, get this entire spindle out of the car. And also I want to determine if this spindle's been damaged and if we need a new one. Okay, so this looks normal. This looks like every car on the market today. You have a pretty red caliper, it's gotta be painted like that. You've got mounting brackets integrated as part of the spindle, so it's not technically a bracket, which is fine. Of course, you get in any kind of accident where you stress the caliper and you will bend this entire spindle and have to replace it. The axle has got a QR code on it, just like the rotor did. The axle has got to be, I'm sorry to say this, Tesla, but this has to be the cheapest looking drive axle I have ever seen. And now you can see down in there, everything's loose and disconnected, and I'm pretty sure, you know, not that I doubted our diagnosis when we were just looking from afar, but you can't really debate it anymore. The steering is not the issue. The axle, drive axle, is the issue. And to this car's credit, it drives without this axle connected. So you could actually get it to roll into this garage bay for you, which was a huge help, because with the weight of the battery tray on this car, there was no way I was pushing it. So now we're going to break this hub bolt, retaining bolt, loose. Then I like to put air hammer right on there so we don't mushroom anything by banging on this hub. But we'll put an air hammer in there and pop, hopefully, the axle out of the hub. And given that it's no longer connected to the car on the other side, I think we'll have no problems with hurting anything in the driveline as we push on it. if we can clean this axle off a bit. We finally got it out of the car, and we are seeing a problem. Of course, there are always problems, but you can see it's packed. The boot is still packed full of grease. We got to repair that, refill it with grease. And then we had those two bearings. They're now sitting here, and we're going to have to figure out where they went relative to all of this. And this should be a CV joint, a constant velocity joint, but it's torn open. I don't know if you could tell in the camera, but that sound is the end of the axle grinding inside the joint. It should be completely seated in the end. So that got ripped out. Problem one. Problem two. If you look at that, see if I could get that in focus. We're kind of destroyed on the end here. So the bearings definitely don't fit on that. They kind of fall off and they have no purpose inside that. And they go deeper inside the end of the transfer case. And we've destroyed that. There's a retainer clip here that's messed up, so theoretically you could take the end, if you look at this, you could take the end off of this axle. This it's probably some kind of splined drive. Not splined like this end, but big fat tines instead. So this drive mechanism is removable, pressable probably at a machine shop. But nobody's going to sell just this drive end. We're going to just want the whole axle, especially given that the CV joint is destroyed inside it. And that is going to be the end of our video for today. Whew. So you kind of saw in the high speed there, I was tearing into that knuckle, and what I learned is that I was basically taking it apart the wrong way. I had to pull out the entire screw that was clamping together the knuckle onto the upper control arm, and I pulled that, it popped loose instantly. You can see that on the video if you slow it down. And at this point I've got the axle out and we've looked at the damage. We're going to go ahead and order a new axle before we put this car together. So we have a lower control arm, new axle, and then we'll have a running Tesla. I've got lights, I've got fenders, I've got bumpers, I've got everything I need to put this car back together. I just need probably about 2 hours to get the whole thing done, and I'm missing a part or two. And in the next video, you're going to see me put the car back together, you're going to see me figure out what those bearings are for, and we'll probably also pull that tie rod end and change it, because it sure, actually the tie rod itself looks bent. So we're going to have to figure that out. And for now, thanks for joining, and see you soon.